Uh, Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those who joined us from the States. I am very happy to open this conference and, and a day in which we will speak about the initiatives of the Elijah Lab, and I will introduce the plan of the day very soon. But before my detailed introduction to this day and to our activities at all, I am very happy to host a good friend, our Dean, Professor Ephraim Lev, who is working with me for many, many years. And actually, our work on the Cairo Geniza, in the Cairo Geniza Center gave birth to the digital humanities initiatives in the University of Haifa. And he is a great supporter and even collaborator who has a project in the lab. So, Ephraim, we are waiting for your greetings.
Thank you, Moshe, and good afternoon to you all. I'm happy and excited to see that there are so many participants, and I'm sure that many more will join us later. So many thanks to the organizers of the conference for the invitation to open this important and interesting conference, Innovations in Digital Jewish Heritage Studies. Ceremonies of this kind and greeting its participant is one of the pleasant duties of a dean. And in this time of the year, one is continually called upon to fulfill this duty. You'll have to believe me, however, that few, if any, of the many important greeting ceremonies in which I have participated and will participate this year is filled with a kind of direct, significant, and personal involvement than this one implies for me. Let me explain why. In the first place, I've been an invisible advisor to Moshe from very early stage of the creation of the lab. Secondly, I'm myself a researcher that in the last 20 years heavily depended on the Cairo Geniza for my work. I'm a historian of medicine and pharmacology. Thirdly, many of the organizers and scholars that will be presenting their research in a few minutes are friends, colleagues, and even former students. Last but not least, I'm involved as a researcher and supervisor in two projects that are currently running in the lab. Moshe mentioned one, but it sum up as two. Long-time commitment of support should never be taken for granted. Therefore, I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart to the member of the Eichal Eliyahu for their deep and long commitment and support of Elijah Lab. I'm sure Moshe will tell you more about this organization, their mission, and the great relationship they maintain with us. I would like to thank the Elijah team, or should I say family, for their great effort of making a difference in making digital humanities appreciated, accepted, and lately even needed in the faculty and the university. And for their efforts in producing the conference. So here are the main one, and there are more. I thank you all, Yotvat, Moshe, Tzvi, Eli, Sinai, another Moshe, Vered, Adar, Uri, Eyal, Dror, Yael, and I'm sorry if I missed anybody. It's a big family, as you can see. One way or another, it is you, dear audience, and not me, unfortunately, who will be able to enjoy the richness of the talks scheduled in the program for today. On behalf of the University of Haifa, and especially the Faculty of Humanities, I wish you a fruitful conference and a very enlightening discussions. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Efraim. Professor Tzvi Kuflik, who should have chaired this opening session, was unable to attend at the last moment. As the director of the lab, I will introduce myself and later on share the lectures in the opening session. So I will present now an introduction to the Elijah Lab initiatives, which is also introduction for this day conference. So many thanks, Efraim, for your warm words, as always. Efraim is a partner and also is helping us in arranging and thinking of the future of the lab, as I will present it later on. Today, this is an exciting day, an opportunity to introduce Elijah Lab and discuss the various initiatives in the lab, as well as share responses, insights, perspectives, and related studies by various international colleagues and collaborators. Before presenting an overview of our work, I would like to thank many people who contributed a lot, both to our daily work and to this special day conference. To Eyal Ben Eliyahu, the chair of Jewish History and Bible Department in the University of Haifa, who initiated this event. To the entire team of Elijah Lab, and especially to those who planned and made this day, Yotvat Moshe, Eli Fisher, Sinai Rusinek, Vered Raziel Kretschmer, and Adar Miller. To Tzvi Kuflik, whose long-term collaboration and commitment enabled the turn of the University of Haifa towards the field of digital humanities. And also a word of farewell and special thanks to Dror Elovich, who served the lab in the recent years and sadly has been hijacked by the high-tech industry. And today is actually his last day with us. Finally, I would like to thank the board of Echal Eliyahu NGO, whose deep commitment to the Holy Trinity of 1, Jewish studies, 2, advanced technologies, and 3, connecting the academic ivory tower with the wider public and with educational goals, enabled our activities thus far. A couple of months ago, during a discussion in the Higher Education Council Committee for the Humanities, we had been surprisingly told off for the very use of the term lab, which implies a subordination of the humanity to the discourse and research methods of the sciences. Some of you already heard my preaching for the model of back and forth, Ratzor Vashor, a perpetuum pendulum in which the scholar always moves between the use of experimental and quantified computerized tools on one hand, and the singular, unique individual thinking on the other hand. This is a swing between information, data, algorithmic manipulations, and verbal insights, understanding. This is a vision in which digital humanities are indeed digital, but never forget that they are also humanities. If so, why lab? When we say lab, we see the spirit of teamwork and collaboration which the sciences may and should bestow the humanities with. The discussion created from a fertile dialogue, like the Jewish Chevruta or Bet Midrash. This day conference is designed in that spirit. In every session, we will present projects and initiatives in Elijah Lab alongside responses and studies of collaborators. I shall divide my words into 3 parts. In the first and the second, I will present the projects in our 2 areas of work, digital accessibility and research of Hebrew manuscripts, and geohistorical mapping in Jewish history. I will conclude in presenting our vision to a future expansion of the lab to include a kind of a greenhouse or an incubator, a space for new initiatives, support and research counseling in DH for scholars and research students in Haifa and beyond, as well as for digital heritage institutions. When we speak about digital accessibility and research of Hebrew manuscripts, we refer to a long pipeline, beginning with digitization, namely making the material available as images, continuing in various methods for textual availability, be they platforms for scholarly or crowdsourced transcription, or the use of deep learning for automatic and written text recognition. Moving on to annotation of the text, adding another layer of meaning, such as identification and classification of content, named entities, people, places, dates, and so forth. All these elements should lead to helpful tools for accessing all layers of information, images, texts, annotation, both for human and computers, namely providing intuitive and easy-to-use interfaces, as well as machine-readable modes, API, enabling other scholars to access the data, use it in other projects, and utilizing big data and distance reading approaches. The seemingly more technical work oriented at digital accessibility is not detached from the back and forth model. It is not only a technical work, but rather a creative and experimental one. As we walk along the path aimed at accessibility, we also find ourselves exploring the corpus of manuscripts and revealing new insights about their content, structure, importance, contexts, methods of writings, and more. We began our journey in the second stage of the pipeline, text production, and the method of crowdsourcing in the Scribes of the Cairo Geniza project, collaborating with the development of a crowdsourcing platform for transcription of fragments from the Cairo Geniza. The key players in the project were D.H. Judaica from Penn Library, Oxford Universe, and the Princeton Geniza Research Center. The trilingual English, Arabic, and Hebrew platform enables the wider public to contribute to the classification and transcription of fragments from the Cairo Geniza. The platform continues to be active and to gather public contributions, mainly managed today by the team in Penn. In this project, we also learned the challenges of crowdsourcing, including the quality of crowd contribution, the need for an intuitive, attractive, and ergonomic interface, and the large investment needed for community engagement. The next project, Tikkun Sofrim, the next project, Tikkun Sofrim, Tikkun Sofrim, mainly stayed at the stage of text production, adding an element of HTR, handwritten text recognition. The project was created thanks to the wonderful initiative of our collaborator, Daniel Stuckel from SPL Paris, who developed his team developed at the time a deep learning algorithm for reading handwritten ancient text, Kraken. Together with Zvi Kuflik from the Department of Information Systems and with further support from the Maimonides Fund, we developed a platform inviting the public to correct the mistakes in the deep learning induced transcription. In addition to the development of the platform and the actual transcription of manuscripts from the later rabbinic midrashic genre of the Tanhuma, we developed methods for, We developed methods for aggregating the information gathered from the public and decision-making in cases of doubt. I will not get into details here, we presented them in the past. This project also provided us our first attempt in addressing the following stages, that of annotation aimed at future helpful interface for accessing the texts. We developed a model for dynamic library of texts that will enable presenting the variety of interrelated Tanhuma texts using CTS, Canonical Text Service, which identifies any piece of text and enables defining its affinities to other texts in the library. Tikkun Sofrim provided us with another example of the challenges of community engagement. We realized that such projects cannot provide us with a text in the sufficient accuracy expected in critical editions. Hence, we search for a model to maximize the contribution of our imperfect text production for accessibility of Hebrew manuscripts. We addressed this challenge in the second hackathon of the Haifa BSc program in Digital Humanities 2 years ago. This led us to a few initiatives of text reuse detection tools, initially for automatic classification of maltranscribed manuscripts and fragments. Instead of applying text classification only down the road, we use it in an earlier stage, already for the sake of annotating the raw text. Furthermore, we realized that the same method, namely of text reuse, which will be presented in detail later on today, is also very helpful for other elements in the pipeline, such as automatic linking and alignment of related texts, as well as creating helpful research environments for text reuse detection. All these projects, which are in initial or work in progress stages, will be further presented in a session devoted to the subject later on today. The new direction of text reuse applications brought 3 new projects, including automatic cataloging of anthological manuscripts funded by the Yuval Ne'eman postdoc fellowship, efficient identification of Arabic medieval books from the Cairo Geniza, and STAM, collaborating again with Tzvi Kuflik and also with Nachum Dershowitz from Tel Aviv University. STAM is aimed at applying text reuse detection in feedback mechanisms to retain deep learning models for handwritten text recognition. Not included in the slide is another project really in its first days in which we hope to develop combined Hebrew-Arabic text reuse detection tools. We intend to make these studies the basis for systematic projects, together with the National Library, to a robust application of the pipeline on all ancient and medieval Hebrew manuscripts, as well as the basis for a digital library of the Tanhuma corpus. I will now move on to survey our geohistorical mapping initiatives in the field of Jewish studies. Here, less than a kind of a sequential pipeline, but more of a hub in which the interrelation between different projects is a kind of one project is fertilizing one another, not necessarily following one another. So let me present those projects from past to present. The first is ALMA, Digital Atlas of Judaism in Late Antiquity, led by Eyal Ben Eliyahu. Eyal and Dror Elovich will present this project in the last session today. The second is the geohistorical mapping of Jewish communities as well as other minorities in the early Islamic Caliphate. projects, which began before Elijah Lab and became kind of partners of us, led by Eli Fisher and Moshe Shor, mapping and geoanalyzing Jewish history based on rabbinic literature, including responsa texts and prenumeranten lists. Both will be presented in 2 sessions today. The 5th, we are moving into the modern era, Lodge, mapping the Jewish life between the 2 great wars, supervised by Marcus Zilber and led by Ruth Kaplan. And the 6th is the urban memory of Haifa, mapping contemporary spatial memories of the city of Haifa, initiated by Maoz Azariahu and Nir Rachkovsky, who is also leading this project. May I just add a comment? It's not written, but I would add it, that when you look at these projects from late antiquity to contemporary Haifa, you can see something which is quite obvious, how the resolution of data is growing from one project to another, and we are gradually moving from only information about places which are dated only to centuries to very specific people and the place they lived in, and the relation between cities and towns, and up to, at the end of the day, documenting mentalities, documenting memories, documenting the content of people's minds, okay? So anyway, let me share a glimpse into the 3 projects which will not be presented at length today. First is the Atlas of Jewish Communities in the Early Islamic Caliphate, which is based on extracting data from thousands of relevant Arabic works, building a gazetteer of place names, and using a rule-based approach to identity-relevant information for Jewish life. We make this data available through a dynamic map, which is also the basis for further geohistorical studies. I would just say that the researcher who is leading this project, Moran Zaga, is now in the Emirates, and she's now leading the potential collaborations of the University of Haifa with the Emirates. And I really hope that we will be able to develop also a DH collaboration with them. Following the spatial turn in Jewish studies, the project Interwar Jewish Space in Lodz examines the physical urban space of a vast part of the middle and upper class of second largest Jewish community in Poland and one of the largest Jewish communities in the interwar Jewish world. For the special study, 2 major archival sources holding tens of thousands of names and addresses are digitized and mapped using various tools such as OCR and GIS. In addition to spatial research, a subjective examination adds to the understanding of the perception of the urban landscape by Jewish inhabitants of Lodz. Now, this is exactly the value of back and forth I am speaking of, combining the big data analysis with the individual stories and see the relations between them, going back and forth from one mode of thinking to the other and enriching both. Beyond its contribution to research in Jewish and urban studies, the project is intended to become an open source digital map in which people would be able to perform genealogical research and add personal materials of their own, contributing to further research of the Jewish community of Lodz. And last one, the Urban Memory Project, which creates an interactive memory map of Haifa and other Israeli cities, which will be easily accessible on digital devices. Using the History-Pin digital platform, we are exploring the ways in which past and present residents can share memories of their street, neighborhood, and town in the form of stories, photos, videos, and audio files. By combining such personal memories with information from city archives and other public data sources, we hope to make available the archaeology beneath the surface of the urban space we live in. Within the current days we are living here, this project is also very important because it is involved with actual community engagement, with our students interviewing elderly people, and may also enable us to bring together both Arab and Jewish perspectives or memories of the city. Lastly, I would like to say a few words about the future vision for expanding Elijah Lab from its current state as a hub of projects to a unit that may serve as a greenhouse or a support center for a variety of digital humanities projects. Members of our team are frequently approached for counseling and advice in the design and implementation of digital humanities projects. Scholars, graduate students, and various heritage institutions are all in a need for a knowledge center that will enable them to realize their DH visions. Though we do not have their budget and will not be able to fund those who turn to our advice as they do, we do intend to follow the impressive model of the DH Center in the Library of Princeton and start already from the coming year a DH service in which we will be able to share our experience and expertise with others. So I am looking forward to hear the talks and responses in the following lectures, and thank you all for joining us today. Okay, now I will switch my hat and become the chair again. And actually we are moving directly to the first session of the day, the session organized by Sinai Rosinek and hosting also Professor Elton Baker. Sinai Rosinek is she's a long-term friend and a person who made the digital humanity available in Israel. She is accompanying us in Haifa from the very first consulting committee I established about 7 or 8 years ago to think how we can do digital humanities in Haifa. And I am grateful for so many contributions of Sinai. And now to the more formal presentation of her. Sinai Rosinek teaches at our BSc in Digital Humanities program and works at Elijah Lab Digital Humanities Lab at the Haifa University, where she leads the project Travel Lab and consults other digital humanities projects. Her previous project, Kima, towards a Hebrew historical gazetteer, has started with a Pelagius resource development grant, and it assembles geographical type toponyms used throughout Jewish history into an open linked data resource and tool. Sinai will speak about questions from the Travel Lab, modeling medieval Jewish travel. Thank you, Sinai. Please.
Thank you, Moshe. Let me now try to share my screen. Let me know if this works. I think we are. It'll take me a second. Okay, can you see the mess on my desktop or the presentation? I know they're a little bit alike. Can you see the slide? Moshe, you're muted?
Now we see a slide.
The first slide.
It looks like a title of your session, yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so I'm very happy and thank you, Moshe, for this introduction. I'm very happy to be here today. This is the Book of Travels, which was compiled by Rabbi Benjamin, the son of Jonah, of the land of Navarre. His repose be in paradise. He set forth from Tudela, his native city, and passed through many remote countries, as is related in his book. In every place which he entered, he made a record of all that he saw or was told of by trustworthy persons, matters not previously heard of in the land of Sepharad. These words open the itinerary of Benjamin of Tudela, a 12th century Jew who traveled to the east and back and left the text which, along with some other Jewish travel narratives, stands at the focus of the Travel Lab project at Elijah Lab. It is a text that started a prolific tradition of scholarly and cultural reception. The 11 pages in the narrow column here in the left on the margin are a partial list of this reception created by Abraham David. Several manuscript witnesses dozens of printed editions in Hebrew and translation to over a dozen languages, no more, which make the 3 pages on the second column. Early modern emulators, modern literary namesakes, multiple, including a Twitter namesake I just recently found about, multiple cultural references and adaptations. In the world of research, this text culminated in important 19th and 20th century scholarly editions, and in the past decades, 20th century insights on the value of travelogue literature and spatial history engendered another wave of scholarly interest that is still ongoing. There is, however, no digital edition in Hebrew available online except a scan of the Asher 19th century bilingual edition available through the Internet Archive viewer. This then was to be our first step at the Travel Lab project, using Transkribus to train an adaptable model, OCR model, one of the first for Hebrew, and correcting the text. But a digital edition is far more than just a digital text. It is in transitioning a medieval text between the technology of the book and the digital. We have the chance to restructure, reorganize, and reinterpret it, not just the chance, but the need. And we do so in the language of XML and as part of a community of the TEI, the Text Encoding Initiative. The next stages, cleaning, remodeling, enriching the text with annotation, cleaning and remodeling again, linking and disambiguating, cleaning again, were done with the help of these 2 irreplaceable open tools, OpenRefine and Recogito. Recogito by Rano Simon and Pelagios, which is, I think, the 3rd time you are hearing about it today. There is one thing I would like to say now before moving on, and that is regarding the title of this conference. Innovation.
1 second, Sinai, can you rearrange the screen that we will not see your private messages on the right? Just you have to enlarge, I guess, the window of.
I can. Anything saucy? I didn't even see.
No, but just.
Okay. Yeah, is that okay?
Yes.
Slide looks odd though, but yeah. Okay, what I wanted to say, innovation is a buzzword for attracting attention and funds in the academia and in the general discourse. It is inevitable, and indeed it is what we do and a criterion of evaluation for everything we do in the academy, but it is not, if you ask me, what is important in what we do. Sorry, lost the mouse. I think ours is a much humbler vocation. We are accompanying a precious artifact, a treasure of cultural heritage, through a medial transition. Whatever we use, whether it is innovative or traditional, simple or complex, should be judged by the way in which the next generation can approach this cultural artifact, can read it and research it. Having already done the work of structuring, annotating, and linking on one of the editions, we now wanted to inherit this work to other editions in other languages. Arabic and English. It is there where we actually had to innovate, or at least build our own tool and contribute it to the community. We did this with the XML Planter, generic work environment, which serves to complement and facilitate XML TI editions, editing without having to code. Its two modes are XML to XML, a tool that assists the creation of parallel editions, and XML to TSP to XML, which is a lookup tool that enables replacing or adding attributes to TI elements from tabular data resources. Now, looking forward, this is where we are now. Looking forward, what we're aiming at is an interface. And we are asking ourselves, and this is something that we've been asking from the beginning, because the interface and at the end of our work, making our work accessible is what stands in the background of our ideas about how to model the text and the various stages of work. And these are the questions that are still open. How do we facilitate hybrid and multiple readings and research on a digital platform? How do we weave together text, network, database, map, infographics, all of these eyes that the digital realm has given us to look at the text? And how do we add to the addition the scholarly tradition and enable ongoing conversations? This is not something that we should do necessarily as innovative things, but maybe as the way of our improving the reading of a text that has always been a map and a knowledge base and a network of links. So these are the questions with which I'm very excited to give the floor to Elton. Pelagios has taught me everything I know about this work, the Pelagios community and the Pelagios people in the community. Sorry, this was not a slide to share. So I'm very happy to give the floor to Elton, who will explain a little bit about Pelagios and his projects. And I'll stop the presentation now, and thank you.
Sinai, should I just start talking? Is an invitation?
Actually, I'm supposed to present you before you start talking.
Yeah,
so thank you, Elton, for being with us. Elton Barker is a professor of Greek literature and culture. He has a particular interest in literary geographies and the representation of space and place in non-modern texts. Since 2008, he has been leading and co-directing a series of collaborative projects using developing digital resources for spatial analysis in the humanities. Chief among these is Pelagios, which has established a method of and developed tools for the semantic annotation of place that enables different online materials hosted by different resources providers to be interlinked. In 2019, Pelagios relaunched as a formal association where work is coordinated, resources pooled, and development planned by equal and interdependent partners from all around the world. Elton is currently the Pelagios Works General Secretary, and Elton will speak about a digital journeying around mapping an ancient Greek travel narratives, and will create a wonderful conversation as he has a wonderful collaboration with Sinai. Please.
Many thanks for the invitation. The journeying about is as much my digital journeying about as I think, as you'll see, Pausanias is. So what I wanted to do actually was to give a sense of where I'm coming from, a project that led into the Pelagios initiative, and then finally end with a project in which I'm heavily engaged in now, which is Pausanias' description of Greece. So I think you should all see my screen now, and only this particular screen. Well, I wanted to start paradoxically, isn't with the text. I mean, I'm a text person, and I feel very much an imposter in this workshop because I'm coming at things from an ancient Greek perspective. So generally BCE rather than CE, although Pausanias is a bit of an exception there too. But paradoxically, I wanted to start with an image, a map indeed, to give us a sense of why non-modern representations of space, why non-modern geographies are just so interesting. So this is, I'm sure, a map that many of you are familiar with from the Book of Curiosities, 10th century Arabic text, giving us a representation of something, but exactly what? And you'll see these rather clunky looking dots around the outside of that main central image. They are in fact semantic annotations which enable us then to map this map and to actually see that this map is a map of the Mediterranean, which gives us a sense of the representational force of different ways of mapping and thinking about geography and space and place more generally. So this is really what interests me, how non-modern cultures represent space. I'm interested in text, however. So what I want to do first of all is to give you a sense of how my own digital journeying about, as I said before, so how I got into this, looking at the text of Herodotus, the 5th century Greek historian, 5th century BCE, that is. Then I want to move briefly into Pelagios, not to spend too much time on Pelagios, but just to set up a couple of things, including the method and tool, and then really spend most of my talk, hopefully, let's say 15 minutes on discussing what we're doing with Pausanias and really get you into the nitty gritty and to the kind of dirt under the fingernails. And in fact, in many ways, although we didn't coordinate this at all, what Moshe and Sinai have already talked about relating, I think, the importance of working with other people. So yes, this is innovative stuff, but there's also a lot of reuse going on here. And also that other aspect of this continual dialogue between, let's say, the digital aspect and the humanities aspect of digital humanities. Both of these aspects are what I want to flag up in this talk. They're my really two take-home points. So without further ado, let's start with Herodotus. And this is already, I think, a very good example of reuse in the digital humanities world. So this was a project that ran from 2008, 2010, and then 2014 to 15, or kind of a bit of a follow-up. And that was really to map this amazing historian writing in the 5th century BCE, where he writes about the war between his peoples, the Greeks, and the Persians. And in order to be able to explain and to get to the bottom of why these two peoples came into conflict, he maps the world in a way, shows how the Persian Empire grew and how Greeks and Persians eventually came into contact and conflict. So space is really at the heart of his historiographical endeavor. And we were interested in trying to leverage digital tools to bring out the spatial aspect, particularly his interest in places and how they were linked together. And we were able to do this because there was already an initiative that we could build on. This was the Perseus Classical Library of Texts, where they not only make texts available, both in the original language and also in the English translations and other translations, not only make them available to consult, but actually to reuse, fundamentally to reuse. So there's this warning, as I learned very quickly, a warning kind of orange button here called XML. You press that, and what this nice looking web page that you see suddenly becomes this horrible looking pointy brackets. But what was important for us was a lot of the groundwork that we were interested in doing. So a lot of the place information had already been captured. So here, just to draw your attention to the first place that's mentioned by Herodotus, where he comes from, Halicarnassus, modern day Bodrum, was already encoded within this digital text that we're getting from Perseus. Now, with that information, we could relatively simply generate a database of all place information and map it. And here we have the places of Herodotus mapped. There are certain useful aspects for doing this, not least of all to show you the kind of concentration of places around the Aegean, and that's very much his focus. You also get a sense that as you move away from the centre, places become less important and natural features become more important. So the places we highlighted as red dots, natural features as blue dots. And so as you see, as you move away from the Aegean centre, then places fall out of the narrative, and the way Herodotus orientates his, not to forget, Greek reader, is through references to physical features such as rivers and mountains. Now, it's kind of useful to give you a brief sense, a snapshot, if you will, of the places mentioned in the narrative. However, you will already have seen some kind of rather important issues as well. It might be okay to represent a place as a red dot, but representing a river or a sea as a blue dot, not so good. So there's a problem here with our own technology and the way in which we tend to think in terms of coordinates in the GIS, in a GIS framework. But even more problematically, and that again, I think speaks to the technological issue, this doesn't in any way give us a sense of how space is being represented in the narrative. This is just a kind of a snapshot, bird's eye view, not at all that kind of view that we were interested in unpicking through Herodotus's route through the various histories that he talks about. So we wanted to go, so in that sense, we wanted to go back to the beginning in a way and go back to the text and try to construct a spatial analysis from the text. We lighted upon two rather important concepts that are going to be important in this Pausanias project I'm going to be talking about in a minute. That is to say, first of all, we wanted to extend our interest in place beyond the idea of place name, toponym, which is what we were getting from Perseus, to a more broader concept of space and place, in particular the way that an individual or peoples could represent a place. So here's a really good example at the beginning of book 5, which was our test case book. There were 9 books, and book 5 is the central hinge of the narrative. And we get this opening passage where a lot of spatial information is given to us. The Persians whom Darius left behind under the command of Megabasdas. But the only place name mentioned at the beginning is Perinthus. So there's all this other information that wasn't being captured in the Perseus text that we were interested in trying to extract. And the other aspect is very much the relational aspect, how Herodotus is stitching these places together as he leads us through the narrative. And here I'll give you an example, again, from book 5, of how Herodotus crisscrosses back and forth the Mediterranean, from the Eneti on the Adriatic Sea all the way to the east with Medea. So there's this sense of how places are put together. So using this one book, book 5, as a test case, we went through it by hand with very, very basic technology, and basically an Excel spreadsheet. It was as basic as that. Annotating or marking the places that were mentioned, the peoples that were mentioned, and the relationship between them. So how places and peoples were related to each other over the course of the narrative. So if you like, a sense of generating a network from the text. And of course, as soon as you mention network, this is what you get. This is the famous spaghetti monster or hairball that no one talking about networks in humanities can afford not to mention. And I think a very lucid explanation from one of the great network theorists in classics, Irad Malkin, just down the road from you folks, I guess, talking about how difficult it is to read these networks in a sensible way. And there's a limit here, again, of the technology. Now, you can clear this up. So, for example, that what you saw, that hairball, has now been cleared up into a visualization we can make sense of. Of course, there are choices there. There's a lot of selectivity. There's a lot of stuff left out. But nevertheless, this allows a picture to emerge, a sense of those places at the center of this network, highlighted both by their centrality and also by the size of font, how they are the agents in book 5, how instead of now looking at the world from that bird's eye view and locating places according to their topographical location, a set of coordinates, we're now getting a sense of their value, their influence within a network. So in other words, a space now reimagined as a world organized around relations, agency, and power. No surprise that Persia is at the center there, but also some interesting constellations relating to various Greek states as well. Now, of course, Irad is right that this isn't going to tell us anything so much as really provide a provocation into further analysis, going back to the text, trying to then explain what, trying to explain what's really at the basis of a visualization like this, and try to then explain and account for the various relationships that we see. Nevertheless, I think it's quite a useful provocation, a useful heuristic. So here's already, I think, one less, the importance of visualizations in the digital humanities, not to provide an illustration of data so much as to provide a provocation for further analysis of it, I would say. The other problem with looking back now at this Herodotus project was that we were working, as I said before, by hand with this Excel spreadsheet. That data has now since been lost, so none of these data we can share with other people, and that's going to be a very important aspect when I come back to the Pausanias project in a second, and the possibility of now capturing that information. And that's because in between the Hestia project and the Pausanias project came Pelagios. Now, Pelagios is something else, and I don't want to spend too much time, at least in my presentation, talking about it, but it was using one key aspect that emerged from our investigation into Herodotus. That was in the value of identifying place and thinking of a place as a historical unit that can be used then to unpick the way in which a narrative is put together, and how a narrative structures those issues of agency and power. So place is a really important linking factor in Herodotus, and we found that place could also be a very powerful linking factor in the World Wide Web too. There's a problem when you move from an analog world into the digital world. Well, there are many problems, but I think one of the major ones is discoverability. When I'm looking for books on particular issues, particular topics, in my local library, my local academic library, I know where to find these books. But how can I find information that's going to be relevant for what I'm interested in on the web? It's a bit of a wild west web in many ways. So how can we make online resources more discoverable, and how even better can we draw connections between them? So what Pelagios has done is to use the idea of place as a connecting mechanism, a very simple way of connecting different online resources together. Those online resources are hosted by different groups all around the world, but by virtue of approaching their markup of places in the same way, their resources can be connected. So how does it work? Well, to enable people to do this for themselves and not just rely upon having a data scientist on the team or having this kind of digital expertise, but rather in really putting the power of coding into the hands of the curator, the data curator, or the digital humanist, we developed this tool. And I can quite, hand on heart, I can say it works because I am your classicist, I am your humanist. I don't really know too much about the technology, and yet I'm able to use this, and it's really very powerful and really helps me do what I want it to do. So let me just give you a brief idea of how Pelagios works through this tool Recogito, and then I'll get onto the kind of nitty-gritty of our digital journeying about with Pausanias. So here we are in the text annotation screen of Recogito. So you can also annotate images and to a certain extent also tabular data, but it's really been designed for text data. Here is it's an English translation from a book of Herodotus. Here is a character string highlighted. And once you highlight a character string, and you can do that in automated ways, but you can also do it by hand, a pop-up box comes up and it asks you, is this character string that you've highlighted, is it a person, is it an event, or is it a place? And if you mark it as a place, if you assert this character string THESSALY, Thessaly is a place, then you have the opportunity then using this map-based visualization to align your specific reference in the text to a global authority. And a global authority for places is a gazetteer, and the global authority for places for the ancient world is Pleiades. So you see how gazetteers and gazetteer URIs, these uniform resource identifiers, essentially like they operate as social security numbers for places. Here, Thessalia is known as Pleiades ;1332, for example. It's a disambiguating measure. Not only does it enable you to disambiguate, not only does it enable you to map that, but also you are creating linked data because you're using this basically an identifier that's stable, that's going to survive, that's recognized, globally. It's an authority. And just to prove what I'm saying, so this is what I see as a user in Recogito, and this, again, a scary looking code is what's going on under the hood. Basically, you're creating linked data. So here you have the target, which is your assertion of this place or this character string as a place in your document, and you're aligning that target to a body, this gazetteer. And with everybody doing this, using a particular authority gazetteers, then you are able to produce data that can be connected with other people's. That's as far as I want to go regarding Pelagos, because I think more interestingly are the issues that working with a digital tool like Recogito that keeps you focused on the text. I think they raises a whole bunch of issues that are really interesting and really speak to the way in which this workshop this seminar has been framed in terms of the importance of the human scholar in working with these digital tools. So for those of you who don't know, Pausanias is writing about, let's say, 150 CE. So I've moved now beyond that critical cutoff date. So I'm now working in, scarily in the modern age, you could say. And he's writing about a journey, or better, journeys around Greece. Greece very roughly defined as 10 areas. There are 10 books. Actually, it's 10 books for 9 areas because he spends the central 2 books, books 5 and 6, are all on one site. Elis, which is where the home of the very important sanctuary of Zeus is, at Olympia. And that's, of course, where we get the modern day Olympic Games from. So we start off in book 1, Attica. We work our way around the Peloponnese, ending up in Arcadia there, and then quickly moving across the Corinth Isthmus to Boeotia and ending in Phocis, where Delphi, another very important Greek cult site, is. And Pausanias' text for a long time was kind of looked down upon. It's a travel guide. Well, travel guides don't really have much of a literary value, do they? Well, I'm sure Sinai and others will beg to differ. And people are beginning to reassess Pausanias in the importance of the way in which he's constructing space in various ways, but particularly kind of a cognitive approach. How for a lot of the text, you're moving through it as if you're on a route, kind of what's people called a hodological kind of map through space, but that interestingly intersecting and cutting across various other ways. So what do I mean? Well, first of all, I mentioned those 10 books and how you really focus on mainland Greece. Once you start annotating the places that Pausanias talks about, however, you suddenly see that this is a map that's beginning to look a bit more like Herodotus, actually, that the oikumene, the kind of the lived world that the Greeks and the Romans knew about. So yes, it is focused, and you are literally taken around those Greek sites, very much in a kind of granular way. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But nevertheless, there are these places mentioned across the Mediterranean in this text. So how do they interact and relate to Pausanias' journey through space? This is a very important question for us, and also important for how we map that. Now, I mentioned granularity. Pausanias is unique, I think I can say, in the ancient world for the extent of detail he gives about specific sites. And this is a big problem for us. I mentioned Pleiades as the authority gazetteer that we have used before, that began as the glue, or Pelagios used from its beginning Pleiades as the beginning glue to its gazetteer ecosystem. Hestia and the Herodotus Project certainly needed Pleiades, its gazetteer, to mark places, but Pleiades' gazetteer only goes so far when you talk about Pausanias. And here I'll give you an indication why. On the left-hand side, this is a page from Pausanias, a page for Athens, actually. And these are the places that, that Pleiades has records of places within Athens. And I think there are something like 15 to 20. And that's Athens, and maybe 5 or 6 for Corinth, etc. Actually, once you start reading the text of Pausanias, there aren't 15 or 20 places in places mentioned within Athens. There are hundreds, thousands. None of this information is in Pleiades. And there's a very good reason for that, because a lot of these places, what I've been talking about, places, are in fact objects. The level of granularity Pausanias takes you to is not only to the city level, Athens, not only to an area within the city, such as the Agora or the Acropolis, for example, which Pleiades does have, but he takes you to temples, and not only to temples, but inside temples, to statues, to paintings on the wall. So a level of granularity that is really unique for, I would say, for a non-modern world, certainly from a Greco-Roman perspective. That's a big challenge, not only for, well, we wanted to use Recordgita to annotate. What could we annotate? What gazetteer could we use? And how could we annotate if we didn't have the gazetteer? And also if we wanted to map it, to try and chart his journey through it, and to produce linked data, and that's something I want to come back to at the end, then we had a big problem. So we did a bit of a hack. There's always a solution, and it tends to involve a hack. So what we did, we hosted our own version of Recordgita, which is quite trivial, actually. So in order not to interfere with the global Recordgita that other people use, and we didn't want to crash the system, and we imported 3 non-gazetteers into Recordgita to function as gazetteers. They are, in order, taking them order of the screen, Topos Text on the top right, bottom left, the German Archaeological Database, Arachne, and bottom right, Judith Binder's Art Historical Gazetteer. These 3 databases had invaluable information to do with places within Athens, and especially the art historical artifacts that Pausanias was describing. So using these, and they also had coordinate information too. So using these 3 non-gazetteers as gazetteers, we were able then to go through that process of alignment that I showed you before. There's going to be another challenge, and now this is going to be the last slide of kind of general stuff. Then I just want to leave a couple of slides, kind of unpick our way through Pausanias, as it were. So the other challenge, and this is something that Sinai has also raised, is how you then make use of your data, how you visualize it, how you analyze it. There's GIS available. So this funky image that you see here is something like a time-space cube from a GIS. I don't really know how it works, but in any case, that's something that we potentially will be using. You can imagine, for example, the virtue of being able to map all the statues and being able to see the number of statues mentioned in Athens compared to the number of statues mentioned in Corinth, etc. And especially if you've got time information, when they were made. If we're interested in those relationships and how places are put together in the narrative, not just from that route-based view, but when Pausanias takes you away from that route-based, maybe some kind of network visualization tool such as NodeGoat would be interesting. If we're thinking of how text and map can be read together, maybe something like Neatline, bottom left, it could be quite a useful interface. And then there's something like Jupyter Notebooks, which is a more, let's say, structured method of trying to make use of your code and writing about that code within a kind of a more user-friendly notebook format. None of these things I'm an expert in. So this is all stuff that I'm going to have to learn now that we've got a very extensive and powerful data set. So what is that data set? So this is where I want to leave you. And these are really just to give you a sense of what our annotation strategy has been, so the choices behind that, and maybe, again, some of the issues related to that. So again, really the importance of interpretation embedded within this annotation model that we're using. So this is the beginning of Pausanias, where he starts off in Attica. The first place he mentions in the whole text is the Greek mainland. So whatever that might mean, I could write a whole book on exactly what is meant by this and how that maps or doesn't map onto any historical notion of Greece. And that's again something to play around with, the kind of the Greek imaginary that Pausanias is to a certain extent constructing as much of its basis in history. In any case, we can identify this as Greece, Hellas, as it occurs in Pleiades. But we wanted to give a little bit more information. We didn't just want to mark the entity. We wanted to give a bit more information. And Recogito, again, is a really great environment for enabling you to provide more information as a way of thinking about how that could benefit analysis. And it does that through its free tag system. So there's a tagging. So you see here, kind of fade out here, add tag. You can basically type in whatever you want in there. And it's great because, that's free text. So you can invent your own tagging system, your own folksonomy, as it were. But at the same time, Recogito will remember what tags you've used. And so that folksonomy can be quite a robust method as well. It's not just something that keeps changing. It will remember what tags you've used in the past in order to produce a system. And this is very important when you're working on a collaboration. Something I should have flagged up at the beginning. All of these projects are collaborative. The Pausanias project especially so. And at its heart, we wanted to create an annotation strategy that we would all be using consistently, and having a system, Recogito being able to remember the tags you're using was absolutely fundamental for us to produce good data. Okay, so what tags are we using? Basically, we're trying to think in terms of triplets. The first tag is to give a sense of the big idea here. How is Pausanias talking about space? He does this in various various ways in which you might think about a spatial idea. So this, the Greek mainland is a kind of a regional aspect. So we've used the tag regional here. Another example of regional would be if you talk about Asia Minor, for example, or Egypt. Other tags that might be in this kind of first position, think of this, in fact, as the genus, if you like, of our tagging system, would be built, to describe the built environment, which can basically describe settlements or other aspects, kind of architectural features of the built environment, things like temples or altars, for example. Or, and this is where we really get to the granular aspect that was so important for us, objects in space. So really that's pushing the idea of what a place might mean. But for us, it's very important to be able to map these individual items, both to literally to be able to map them, but also to be able to identify them, to disambiguate, to then potentially link to other resources. So objects in space like statues, for example, or paintings. And that's where the second tag has its virtue, because the second tag elucidates what you meant by that first tag. So with objects in space, the first tag would be object, the second tag would be statue or painting, etc. In this case, also, and the other important aspect to draw attention to here is how we try to reuse the language of Pausanias as possible, try to use his typology, as it were. So he talks about the Greek mainland, Epirus. So we've basically just used a transliteration of Pausanias' term here, with the expectation that it would be interesting to draw together all the mentions of mainlands, for example, Greek or otherwise in the text. I think this will have special value when he's talking about different statues that can be to the gods, so algalma in the Greek, or statues of humans that are andrias in the Greek. And it'd be important to be able to differentiate between these different kinds of statue types. And the third tag is to give you a sense of how Pausanias is viewing space. I've already talked about how people tend to think about Pausanias as approaching space hodologically as a route. And you saw that map visualization around the Peloponnese. So you're literally going around a route, and he will do the same with cities. He will go into cities along roads, for example. So there's a very strong route-based drive to his narrative, but that's not all you get. You also get, as you have here, I think, a kind of synoptic overview, a bird's eye, or perhaps better for Pausanias, a god's eye, muse eye view, as it were, of place. So we've termed this for this particular way of trying to capture that bird's eye aspect, synoptic, a synoptic vision before he gets to that route base. And again, how these different ways of viewing space interrelate will be a very important part of, I think, of our analysis. Almost there, but it can get. So this is just giving an example of another place, and in this case, showing you that we couldn't use Pleiades Gazetteer. We had to use Topos text. This is Cape Sunion, for example, and again thinking about tricolon mapping procedure. It's a physical place. It's an acra, so it's a promontory. But we again use Pausanias' language, and this time we are on that route-based view. So we've used this label Paus to give you a sense of Pausanias at the ground level, him and his reader moving through. But to finish, I just want to problematize what we're doing in a way by suggesting that it's not only place information that's important, but we're dealing with a narrative, of course. And when you're dealing with a narrative, there are always points of view. And it's especially the case in Pausanias, because Pausanias will often say, and the Corinthians say this, or the Athenians say that. So capturing who's speaking at any one moment is, again, very important. Here, I'll just give you one example of the narratee, who is introduced right at the beginning here as someone who is sailing around Cape Sunion. So the reader, being located in the text. And this, again, an important aspect to be able to capture. And not just focalization, but crucially time. And this, I think, is particularly interesting, when you think of the comparison between Pausanias and Herodotus, for example. Herodotus talks about the known world and often the unknown world, where space is made to conform to time. So in other words, he's telling a history, a chronology, there's a chronological structure, and his narrative, for the most part, reproduces that sense of movement through time. So he begins in book 1 with really on the fringes of human knowledge, 3 generations back with the figure of Croesus, king of Lydia, and as you move through the narrative, you get closer and closer up to the present time. Now, of course, Herodotus is more interesting than that. He'll flip forward, he'll flip back, but nevertheless, there's a chronological drive to his narrative. Pausanias is all over the place, because instead of time being the central drive, space is a central drive. So he's moving through these spaces, and as he moves through these spaces, he goes through time. So this is a very interesting, and that runs counter, of course, to the narrative pool. As you move through the narrative, there isn't a sense of narrative. There's a narrative time developing, but not chronological time. Just to give you an example of what that looks like, again from this opening paragraph, the first time period mentioned is the Macedonian occupation of Attica. That's the first time mentioned. And that's interesting, because in a way, the Macedonian occupation of Athens and Attica becomes a driving principle of book 1. So you get to the Agora, and the Agora is full of monuments of great Macedonian Greek figures. So so this opening paragraph is, if you like, setting up the rest of book 1. But there are various challenges to how we annotate time. First of all, I mean, I've talked about I use this appellation here, Macedonian War, really for want of better words. What time would make sense for Pausanias and for his reader? We could put it in here because some of these events, and certainly some of these characters, are known. So we could use identifiers for specific canonical time dates, a numerical system that we're familiar with, 330 BCE, for example. But that wouldn't make any sense to Pausanias or his reader. So again, trying to respect Pausanias' vision of time and what a time or series of time zones that make sense to his reader is hugely problematic. I've come up with a system based around notable wars, the Persian War, the Trojan War, the Peloponnesian War, to a certain extent the Macedonian War. That's getting some way, I think, into a Pausanian mindset, but I think it's still a bit unsatisfactory. But there's also another issue here, which is more practical. How do you tag time? So Pausanias will often talk about a particular statue and then talk about the person behind that statue. And you'll talk about that person behind that statue, let's say a Ptolemy, for 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs. All of that is a different time than the time of now, us moving through the text. How do you annotate that? Do you annotate each individual place reference as this particular time period, or do you have an annotation that will cover all of these different paragraphs? I tried that to begin with, and I broke Recogito because I was I was making too many annotations. Actually, I didn't break Recogito, I broke my browser. My browser just couldn't load all this information. So there's a big issue, not only conceptually, but also practically how you annotate time. And happily talk about that. But to end with, really these two aspects, it's the sense of close reading. I mean, we generally, when people talk about digital humanities, they talk about distant reading, big data. And it's true that we're producing big data. We've got thousands of place references. We've got hundreds of references to statues. But alongside all that data that we're producing, that we're going to have to kind of make sense of, there is also this intimacy, the Recogito at least, enabling you to be intimate with the text and really understanding in a much more heightened way that because you're having to think like a computer, all of these different problems, how you annotate time and place, and all of these things that you're having to think about in terms of making an annotation are giving us I think a better way of understanding Pausanias's own travel through these spaces and travel through these different time periods. So there's a sense, as I've made the point here, every annotation is essentially an interpretation, as well as hopefully it being useful data that other people can use. And that kind of leads on to the second point, that the linking that we're producing is as much social as it is technical. And that is to say and this goes back to something that again has been mentioned before by Sinai, there's data here that we want to be able to use, and we will be using to try to analyze Pausanias, but we also want to be good citizens and to produce data that other people can use, and potentially also link what we're doing to other more public-facing resources, such as Wikidata. There's a particular interest, for example, in trying to map our people, the people mentioned in the text, to Wikidata ID. So eventually down the line, thinking of an ecosystem where you go from a scholarly project like this to Wikidata and back again. So there's that sense of a broader community. And the Plagios network, which is where I want to finish with, as being one cog in this ecosystem. Actually, the Plagios network, as has already been mentioned, no longer a project. It's no longer us with some money, a core team. It's a network of like-minded individuals who are working in this geospatial area, really, but also interested in sharing expertise and tools, and the possibility of also pooling resources to develop this ecosystem that other people can use. And of course, we're going to get something out of this too. I'll give you one example, a very concrete example. We had a little bit of money set aside for development in the Pausanias project. We wanted to use Recogito, good tool reuse. It was going to do most of the things we wanted, but there's a problem with tags, in that once you made a tag, that was it. That was the order of the tags. Well, with a little bit of money from our project, we were then able to buy Reiner's time, Reiner being the developer of Recogito, to make some development in Recogito so that you could then reorder the tags. So you can make your tags and then you could adjust them, which saved us a whole bunch of time. But that's also development that other people using Recogito can benefit from. So I think that's a really nice example of how our project, reusing this tool, has enabled the tool to get a little bit better. And that is really the hope of the network, in that by sharing our expertise and our experiences, and to a certain extent the tools that we're using, we can then develop methods and tools that are going to be of benefit to others. Here are some resources. I already posted the Plagios two important Pelagios links in the chat. And very happy to answer any questions or follow up on it and make any comments that you might have. So many thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Elton. And we can now open the floor for questions. And you may open your, unmute yourself if you want to ask, or write your question in the chat and I will read it.
Can I start?
Please.
So thank you so much, Elliot and Sinai. That was absolutely fabulous, mind-blowing. And Pausanias is not so appreciated maybe in the literature department, but in the art department, he's an absolute treasure. And I, therefore, and the resolutions you're getting to are so absolutely incredible, like stating that an artifact is actually a place and being able to locate it on the actual topography. And that's my question, actually. For example, one of the issues that we're dealing with is the look of the Parnassus mountain. You have the Lesche of Knidos, and you have the how do you say, Palatinian tripod, Triplian, and I was wondering if you can get to a resolution where you can actually see the location of one object in relation to the other.
Thank you, Sharon. That's a great question. I'm in a way I'm going to deflect it slightly by saying the mapping that we're doing is only as good, I would say, as the resources on which we're relying. And in many ways, that's, if you like, a lesson of linked data too. In the linked data, the way it works is that you're not having to do everything. You look after your bit of the woods, as it were, but other people are developing their own systems. So that's, if you like, the kind of get out of jail free card. In the, you know, we ourselves aren't locating these places ourselves to a certain extent. I should say, however, that one of the resources that we're using, Topos Text, is developed by Brady Kiesling, who is an amateur classicist. I mean, he's done other things in his life, but he's an amateur classicist. And he is going around, because to make his Topos Text app better, he is going around trying to locate this information as best he can. I think the key thing for us is the ability to be able to draw connections between Pausanias, the artifacts mentioned in Pausanias, the objects mentioned in Pausanias, to these other resources. And by doing that, it makes, first of all, you're then able to go from Pausanias text to these other resources and back again. It makes these other resources more visible. And I think it also then enables that opportunity to start thinking about the relationship between the archaeology, the material on the ground, and Pausanias. Now, my key interest here is not to prove Pausanias right or wrong. I'm interested in the representational force of his text. I think one of the key interests for us, or for me at least, is the stuff that he doesn't mention. So my hope by doing this is let's say there's also the possibility of mapping, of course, to other resources outside of Recordkeeper. So we're actually conducting an experiment with a class in America of archaeologists who are mapping certain artifacts mentioned in Pausanias to the Agora excavations, conducted by the American School in Athens. And the hope there is to start bringing these different resources, digital resources, together in order to be able to see the force of representation in Pausanias' text, but also to be able to notice, oh, if you go to the Agora excavations, there's all these other things mentioned that Pausanias doesn't talk about. So what's going on? Why did he not see them? Are there more interesting ideological, cultural issues going on? No doubt. So I think making these resources more visible by virtue of linking them together will hopefully get to the point which you're talking about, which is where you can start really being able to move around these different sites and being able to see how these different objects are being placed together, both in the archaeological record, but also in Pausanias' text.
Do we have any further questions?
I have a comment, if it's okay. I don't want to take other people's time. I spoke already. I think it's fascinating how the most abstract and like the deepest questions of space and time and language are always bumping into the data and the historical context, because it was really important for me to see the way you were using the tags. I've been really trying to make up my mind what my tag set will be. One of the things that I found is that, for example, the physical and artificial built place is a dichotomy that wouldn't work in the Hebrew text, not on Benjamin, and especially not on early modern editions, where the burial place, which is often the cave or the tziyun in Hebrew, is this amalgamation of both. And another really interesting case is the places that what we find a lot in, and I wonder if that is also something you see in the classical literature, that a place is identified with a place which is really a locus in literature. So it's a biblical place or a place name, and I think the actual biblical geography is not very interesting for the traveler of medieval times or early modern times, as much as, you know, just the place in the references, the bibliographic reference, and this is one of the things that really merits a network in our editions. And I'm wondering how much this is something common also to classic non-Jewish literature.
So
Thanks,
just before the answer, I just give voice to a question from the chat from Albert Trinker, and then please answer these two questions shortly, as we are at the end of our discussion, and also you can continue answer people in the break in the chat or speak to them in the break. So Albert Trinker asked, would it make sense to add information, copies of artwork in modern day museum, for instance, or historical collections, creating more time and space span?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is endless, and I think Pausanias is particularly interesting. I think for various reasons. First, because his text has got so much art historical information in it that is precisely, you know, that's now going to be residing in various museum collections. So being able to not only link to archaeological excavations such as the American Agora, for example, but to other museums would be great, if possible, if museums could open up their data and to make it linkable. That would be fascinating. And particularly because of the reception of Pausanias in the 19th century was so crucial to determining the modern discipline of archaeology and to a certain extent the modern discipline of classics. Because Pausanias in many ways is already a classicizing author, in the sense that he's taking us around Greece and Greece's antiquities, looking at the past or the various pasts of Greece. So there's already this very strong classicizing tendency in Pausanias, and the kinds of objects he talks about, and being able to think about how he's organizing information and how that information is now organized in archaeological sites or in museum collections. I mean, the potential is endless. Getting back to Sinai's point, I think it's absolutely the case that, and again, I think this is where Recogito's flexibility comes in that it really gets you to think very hard about the categories that you want to use or are thinking of using on a particular text. So just to give you, a couple of examples, maybe from Pausanias, an island, for example, at various points in Pausanias can be physical, where he's talking about the island as something as kind of physical thing. It can be also built when he's talking about the built environment, or it can also be regional, where he's talking about maybe Sicily or Crete as a kind of a regional space. You can only tell by context. You can only tell by looking at how the island is being talked about. And another example here is where he talks about places such as Cheronia, which is this settlement in Boeotia. He doesn't tend to talk about it as a settlement. He talks about it as a battle, this famous battle of where the Macedonian Greeks under Philip defeated a combined force of Greeks and basically ended the kind of the Greek city-state as we know it. So he's not talking about Cheronia as this settlement. He's talking about it as a battle. So again, it's only by looking at the language of the text and the context that these things emerge, and that's certainly true also for the kind of the literary aspects of the text as well.
Thank you very much, Elton, and thank you very much, Sinai. And we are looking forward to meet you all again in 15 minutes time. Please correct me if I am wrong. Yes, in 4:45 Israel time, 3:45 in Europe, and 7 hours earlier in the East Coast in Prenumeranten in Jewish books. Looking forward to meet you again in 4:45. See you.